I love it when after worship, folks will meet me at the back of the aisle there, at the back of the sanctuary, and they'll say to me, you know, that was a really uplifting worship service. And it can be anything that happens in the service that uplifts them. It could be the music, it could be the liturgy, it could be the sermon, whatever it is. I love it when people come out of worship and say, you know what, I really felt like I was able to connect with God. This moment of worship, this hour of worship just really lifted my spirit. I love to hear those comments, which is why I think I was really taken aback when I was reading a devotional recently that quoted Brian McLaren saying something that I really, just really caught me off guard. He said, the Spirit leads us downward. I thought, downward? I thought the Spirit was supposed to lift us up. What is this thing about the Spirit leading us downward? How does the Spirit lead us downward? But then I read on to what he had to say. He said this, he said, the Spirit leads us downward to the bottom, to the place of humility, to the position and the posture of service. That's where the Spirit, like water, flows. He goes on to say this. He goes, if you listen to the Spirit, here's what will happen to you. You'll be at a party and you'll notice on one side of the room all the beautiful people laughing and having fun together. But in the far corner, you'll notice a person who is alone, feeling awkward, not knowing anyone. The Spirit will draw you to the person in need. He goes on, he says, you'll realize that someone is angry at you or resentful towards you or is working behind the scenes to harm you in some way. Everything you will want to do is to write them off and to get back at them, but the Spirit will draw you towards them in humility. Or he says this, you'll see a person or a group being vilified or scapegoated. Everyone is blaming them, shaming them, gossiping about them, feeling superior to them, venting their anxieties on them. But the Spirit will draw you to differ courageously and graciously, and you will risk your reputation in defending the person or the people being scapegoated. And then finally he says, it'll be late, and you're tired, and you come home and there are dishes to do, or clothes to pick up, or trash to empty. Someone else could have done all these things, and you will think all of this in anger. You will rehearse in your mind the speech that you're going to give them, and then you will think, but I guess they were tired too, or they were overwhelmed as well. So maybe I can help. You know, these are great examples, down-to-earth examples of how perhaps Brian McLaren was right. The Spirit, yes, will lift us up at times of worship, but the Spirit will often lead us downward into the place of service, into the place of humility, that perhaps the Spirit will do that work as often as the Spirit does the work to lift us up. The Spirit, in other words, opens our eyes to the needs around us. And it is the work of the Spirit that awakens us to those needs that are around us that would often go unmet if we only pay attention to when the Spirit lifts us up in worship, or if we only pay attention to the ways in which the Spirit makes us strong. Sometimes I think the Spirit weakens us enough to see the need around us. It reminded me of the parable that Jesus tells at the end of the Gospel of Matthew. It's one that many of us have heard before. It's the story of judgment, actually. It's the separation of the sheep and the goats. And Jesus says that the king comes and he puts the sheep on one side and the goats on the other side. But then it goes on to say this, and then the king will say to those on his right hand, the sheep, come, you are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me in. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. And I was in prison, and you visited me. And then those righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothes? clothes? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And then Jesus says, whatever you did to the least of these, you did to me. He goes on to say that the goats, he will banish them, and then he will say essentially the same thing, for I was hungry and you didn't give me anything to eat. I was thirsty and you didn't give me something to drink. I was in prison or sick and you didn't visit me. And they'll say, when did we see you that way? And he says, whatever you did not do to the least of these, you didn't do to me. And perhaps the key to that story is this. Those who do not have the Spirit awakening them to the needs that are around them will miss the blessing of being able to minister to those who are in need. If our eyes are constantly looking up, perhaps the Spirit needs us to look down, or to look in those places that often get ignored, or to look at those people who often get marginalized, the situations that get glossed over because we're taking care of all of those needs that lift us up, rather than help us look into the places that have been forgotten. So, I love it when people come out of worship and they say, wow, that worship service just really uplifted me. I love those moments where I was uplifted to worship God. But my hope is that as they leave this place, their eyes aren't so lifted up that they can't see the need that is around us. And that just doesn't go for you, that goes for me as well. Because you see, as I'm lifted up by your comments after a worship service that was really meaningful for you, I've also got to recognize not everybody heard that sermon. Not everyone felt that wonderful feeling of belonging that is felt here in the congregation. Not everyone knew that they were loved that day. And so maybe as I leave that place, I've got to do my best to meet those people right at their eye level and offer them the encouragement that the Spirit has placed on my heart. I don't know. Just something to think about as we leave this place on a Sunday morning.